Well, thank you for joining me on this exercise 3G. I'm going to be looking specifically at question 1D. It says we've given the complex numbers Z1 and we've got 1 plus I, Z2 and we've got 3 minus 2I, and Z3 is negative 2 plus 3I. And it says to calculate Z1, the product of Z1 and Z3, over Z2 with this asterisk. Now, Z2 with an asterisk is the conjugate of Z2. The conjugate of Z2. So what we've got here in Z2 is we've got a minus. So our conjugate will be 3, not minus 2I, but 3 plus 2I. So that's that asterisk. Be careful with that. So when you see this asterisk here, then you know it's the conjugate of Z2, not Z2. Let's substitute. Z1 is 1 plus I. Z3 is negative 2 plus 3I. And the conjugate of Z2 is 3 plus 2I. And so let's go through and expand the numerator. 1 times negative 2, 1 times 3I, I times negative 2, negative 2I, and I times 3I is 3I squared. And all right, we're going to leave that for now. I'm just going to not touch that because I want to now simplify the numerator. So we've got 3I squared. Now I squared is negative 1, an important concept in complex numbers. So 3I squared is 3 times negative 1. So we have to change that to negative 3. So let's do that. Negative 2, 3I, negative 2I, and negative 3. I'll leave the denominator. And all right, let's scroll down. I'll just add the real components are negative 2 and negative 3, so that's negative 5. The imaginary components, 3I and negative 2I is 1I. And we've got 3 plus 2I. Okay, now to simplify this, we take this fraction and we multiply the top and the bottom by the conjugate of the denominator. So we've got 3 plus 2I, and if that's a plus, then the conjugate has a minus. And so that's 3. Also, we multiply both the numerator and the denominator. This is important so we don't have any I imaginary components when we multiply by the conjugate. Watch what happens. So the numerator, 5 times negative 5 times 3 is negative 15. Negative 5 times negative 2I is positive 10I. I times 3 is 3I. And I times negative 2I is negative 2I squared. And the denominator, 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times negative 2I is negative 6I. Negative 6I. Two I times 3 is 6I. And 2I times negative 2I is negative 4I squared. All right, now let us just scroll down a little bit more. Simplify this. Negative 2I squared is negative 2 times negative 1. So that's going to be positive 2. And negative 4i squared is going to be negative 4 times negative 1. That's positive 4. So let's change that to being negative 15 plus 10i. And let's just make that 13i. And then minus 2i squared is plus 2. And here, the denominator, that's going to cancel. And we got 9 on the denominator. We've got 9 with a plus 4. And so that will become negative 15 plus 2. Negative 13 plus 13i over 13. Now, let's simplify this. Negative 13 over 13. Let's just come up here. Negative 13 over 13. 13i over 13. And so that becomes negative 1 plus I. Negative 1 plus I, there's the solution. So I hope this has helped. Until next time, stay happy.